Welcome to Your Voice with Dr. Susan, a safe place to let your voice be heard, where personal stories are shared that break myths and assumptions. You will hear conversations that can motivate you in your own life to accomplish your dreams. On today's show, we will be hearing from an entrepreneur and his successful journey in the restaurant industry. We will also be hearing from someone who has been challenged by mental health, substance abuse, and relationship issues. Hi and welcome. We're so excited to have Craig Samuel here today. Craig, thank you so much for coming and welcome to Your Voice with Dr. Susan. How are you?
I'm great.
Great. And Craig, you own several restaurants here in Brooklyn, and so one of the things that I know you're here to talk about today is your passion for the restaurant business. So can you start by telling us a little bit about how you got into the business?
Well, I've been in the restaurant business for about 25, 26 years. And I started in Philadelphia. I was in college and I did a part-time job. And I took a job in a small French restaurant. And at the time, I was just working behind the counter and packaging food to go. But the excitement of the kitchen is what really got my attention.
Now, when you were in college, what were you going into college for at the time?
I was a business administration major, and I had a minor in marketing. And I just fell in love with the restaurant business, just being around that excitement.
Oh, that's great. So then how did you continue on after working in that French restaurant?
Well, at the time I was in Philly and I was working at the top-rated restaurant in Philadelphia, one of the top 20 in the world. It was called Le Bec Fin. It was a classic French restaurant. And I was there for about a year and a half, and I went to the owner and I said, I'm looking to move back to New York. And he sat me down, and at the time, French chefs were different than they are now.
How so?
Well, he called me to his office, sat me down, and he said, and I'd been there for a year and a half.
What were you doing there for that year and a half?
I was a line cook.
Okay.
So, I worked my way up from a prep cook to a line cook. And, he called me in the office, sat me down, and said, Peter tells me that you're looking to move to New York. And I said, yeah. And he goes, what's your name? Which was hilarious because I had seen him 6 days a week for a year and a half. But he was that classic French chef who only talked directly to his chef de cuisine and his sous chef.
And Peter was the owner?
And Peter was the executive chef.
I think, can you explain those? Because I think I certainly don't know what the differences are between executive chef and line cook.
So at that restaurant, you had the owner who was Georges Perrier, world famous chef. Google him, it's worth Googling. And then you had Peter Gilmore, who was the chef de cuisine in the morning.
So there's a head chef and a chef cuisine?
Yeah.
Okay.
And, the classic structure would be executive chef, chef de cuisine, sous chef, and then depending on the structure of the kitchen, you'd have chef de parties or commis. So it goes down and down until you get to, I guess, me at that point. But you work your way up. Yeah. But anyway, he sat me down, told me that what he would do is call ahead and get me some interviews, which, again, was wonderful for a man who didn't even know my name.
That's great.
But I got off the train, got back to New York, went into 3 restaurants, was offered a position at every one because this man was so important. Oh, okay. So it was really, my jump-off point was working for the right guy at that time. He was so well known that anybody would have taken.
And even though he didn't know your name, my hunch is that you probably did a really good job, because since he was so well known, and his name was on your recommendation, he probably knew of your good work.
Well, you don't have a long career at Le Bec Fin if you aren't doing your job. Okay. I mean, he's not one of those guys that suffers fools. I mean, if you don't belong there, you don't stay there.
So then what job did you get in New York? You got 3 offers, and which one did you take and why?
I took a restaurant that's on Midtown West. It's actually still there. It is the last of what was called in New York City the Le and La restaurants, and that would be all of the classic French restaurants, Le Reserve, Lutèce, Le Bec Fin, Le Périgord, I'm running through these now. La Grenouille, Le Chantilly, there were a bunch of them, and there's only one left, and that's Le Périgord. So I took that position. At the time, the chef was Antoine Bouterin, and he was...
And how many years ago are we talking now, approximately?
I'm giving away my age.
I know, you're not going to give away your age, but just approximately.
That was in
around.
1993.
Wow.
It was a long time ago. But I took a job there as a line cook, and I stayed there for, I think it was 4.5 or 5 years. And I worked my way up to junior sous chef. And then I left there to work at Picheline, which is on the Upper West Side. And I took a job there as the executive sous chef, which is a step below the chef de cuisine. Executive chef, chef de cuisine.
And at that
executive
time,
sous
what
chef.
was your goal? Was your goal always to just continue and become the head chef? Was it, at that point, did you have in mind wanting to own your own restaurant and to open up your own place?
I would say that the goal changed probably every year. I mean, sometimes every month. I would say at the beginning, I wanted to own a restaurant. And then, actually, I wanted to be an executive chef. You want to work your way up to be the head of the kitchen. And then at some point, you want to own the restaurant. And then at some point, you want to own more than one restaurant. And then you want to have an empire. And then you want to be the president of the United States. There's a joke there.
We won't go there right now.
I make a great taco bowl.
Okay. So it sounds like every time you accomplished the next level, you kind of upped your game, right? You upped your goal. So did you ever feel satisfied in any one of those roles? Were you able to appreciate kind of the accomplishment of getting to that next level?
I'd say yes, if I can. I mean, I appreciated what I achieved. I appreciated the work that went into it. I was always looking for the next thing. So, you know, I don't want to call myself a perfectionist, although I think that I am. But a perfectionist is never satisfied. So you asked if I was satisfied, and I was always saying, well, I didn't get to where I want to be just yet. So,
because I think what you're alluding to is really something that I've noticed, and one of the purposes really of this show is, especially here in America, we're always trying to be the best, and people don't feel like they are, quote, successful until they maybe become the president, or they keep upping it.
And even then sometimes.
And even sometimes, right, they may not feel successful. But so I'm just wondering, how would you define success for yourself in the restaurant business? Because you now, we're going to kind of skip ahead, you actually own 4 restaurants, correct, in Brooklyn, which is a huge accomplishment. I mean, we have viewers that are just starting out probably, or are, you know, making it their way just to not even a top chef or executive chef yet. And they're looking at you thinking, you own 4 restaurants, which is a huge accomplishment. So do you feel successful?
Do I feel successful? I appreciate what I've accomplished.
So you appreciate your what you were able to do.
I appreciate what I was able to do. But there's so much more that I want to do. And I would say, you know, much like the journey to where I am now, even as I do the thing, I know that the thing is not done. I mean, you know, my challenge today is to be better than I was yesterday. My challenge tomorrow will be better, to be better than I was today.
But I think what you're saying, though, is so important is that you're actually appreciating the efforts and your accomplishments and still wanting to do more. So it sounds like you really have that good balance, that it's not just on the next accomplishment, that you can sit back and say, okay, I can appreciate where I am and really take that in, which a lot of people can't do. So I'm glad to hear that you do that, even if you do it a little bit. Because sometimes people will just, you know, go right into the next desire, doing, you know, maybe wanting to be that next greater thing. But you're really saying that you could appreciate where you are right now.
Did I say that?
You did. Well, I heard that.
Okay.
It's okay. So maybe you didn't know you're doing that, but yeah.
That's what I'm doing.
Okay, that's what you're doing. So how did you, I just want to go back a little bit, how did you then decide to open up your restaurant, your first one?
I opened my first restaurant in 2006, and I had been working in the industry since '89.
And you were working at French restaurants, correct?
I was in French restaurants until '99, and then I went to work at the Cub Room in Soho. It was a new American restaurant, but the influences of the food were all French, because the owner, who's still a good friend of mine, had worked at Lutèce, and he had worked at La Côte Basque, which I left out of the in-laws earlier, for 18 years combined, 4 French chefs who were chef owners.
And unfortunately, I have not eaten in any of those restaurants, but I'm getting hungry.
I've eaten in all of their kitchens.
Okay.
But he because his entire career was based on working in French kitchens with French technique and, you know, a French mind state, his restaurants, even though one was a New American restaurant and one was a steakhouse, were still run in that very classic French brigade style. And I fell in love with that and worked my way through it. So once I was, you know, the executive chef of his restaurants, I started at the Cub Room, and I was a chef there.
What kind of food is that?
It was New American, but for all intents and purposes, it was French on the plate.
So could you just tell us a little bit about each of your restaurants really quickly? Because you have 4, so what, they're not French restaurants?
They are most certainly not French restaurants. So my first restaurant I opened in 2006 is called The Smoke Joint, and it's a barbecue restaurant, very traditional
I've been
American
to that restaurant.
barbecue restaurant.
Excellent, excellent.
And 2 years later, I opened Peaches in Bed-Stuy, and it's really a neighborhood American restaurant with Southern influences. So, you know, we do have dishes on the menu that could be, you know, traced directly back to the South, but we also have items that are just sort of what you would expect in a neighborhood restaurant. Then 2 years after that, we opened Peaches Hot House, which is a very classic fried chicken shack. So
what neighborhood is that in?
That's also in Bed-Stuy.
Okay.
So it's about 6 blocks away from
Right.
Peaches, but it's known for its Nashville-style hot chicken. And
Much different than French food.
Very different.
Yeah.
Very different.
And the most recent?
The most recent is a restaurant that's called Peaches Shrimp and Crab. And we opened it as Marietta in 2012, I believe. And what Marietta was, I think, in our mind, the evolution of Southern food. So we always said we had a very traditional Southern restaurant, a traditional barbecue restaurant, a contemporary Southern American restaurant, and then Marietta was sort of what Southern food would be if it had continued to evolve. So it pulled a lot of French and Italian and Asian influences in.
And what neighborhood is that in?
That one is in Clinton Hill.
Oh, interesting.
We did that for about 3 years, and it was fun, and people loved it. But you know, we really sort of decided to consolidate the brand, and we changed it to Peaches Shrimp and Crab, which is a seafood version of our Peaches brand.
So, Craig, you've had over 25 years, 30 years experience in this industry, or even more. We won't want to give away your age. But for those people out there that are starting out, what advice would you give them? If somebody is out there wanting to work in the restaurant business, maybe even own their own restaurant someday, what kind of advice would you give them after all your experience?
That's a question I get asked all the time. And to be frank, the first thing I always say is don't. Just say don't do it.
Don't do it.
Don't do it.
But what if somebody is so passionate
Of
about it?
course,
What if they
of course.
really, this is it?
Well, they certainly, if someone is really serious about this business,
I mean, what would you have done if somebody said to you, don't do it? Look at this borough would just not have the restaurants that it have if somebody had said to you, don't do it. So that's not, I'm going to challenge you on that advice.
I take your challenge. I think it's really important that anybody who wants to open a restaurant or a bar, I think it's important that they spend some time in a restaurant and a bar on the other side of the table. You know, very often people, you know, will say, I want to open a restaurant, I want to, you know, have a bar, and they think it's going to be glamorous. They think that it's going to be, you know, a lot of fun, and it'd be great to like walk over and drop a bottle of wine at your friend's table on his birthday. But what you don't see
Is really the work.
And it's nonstop.
Have you had people that actually came to you wanting to open up a restaurant someday, and they did some of this, they start at the bottom in your place, and then they decided not to do it after seeing what that side?
Decided not to do it?
Decided actually not to do it.
I had a sous chef at the Cub Room. I love this guy. He's a great guy. He had worked his way up in a bunch of places. I brought him on. Very, very talented, very smart. And he just came to me one day in the middle of working. My kitchens were a little more high pressure than most. And he said, I just can't do this. I have no weekends because, of course,
he
all
decided what was important to him then, and he
right,
discovered that.
right. Weekends, birthdays, holidays, like that's when I'm working. If you're out celebrating New Year's Eve, I'm pouring the champagne.
Yes.
So, a lot of people don't realize how entwined you get into making other people happy.
My daughter actually always points that out to me. Whenever we go to a restaurant on a specific occasion,
Right.
she always says, you really need to thank them. We really shouldn't go out on those holidays.
Valentine's Day, Mother's
like
Day.
Thanksgiving,
Yeah.
all those holidays. It's like, don't
Yeah.
go out because they should be home with their families. So we appreciate
Go
you.
out, I'm gonna say.
From a business perspective, go out. Right.
Yeah.
So I would like to ask you about your own personal challenge. So along this way, what was your own, I'm sure there were some challenges along the way for you personally in this industry. What would you say one of your own personal challenges were?
Well, raising a family in New York City itself is difficult, and when you're in the restaurant business, even more so because, again,
The hours.
normally, we're all in the AM cycle, and then everyone's home at night. I missed all sorts of,
You have a family
dance
of children?
recitals. I do, yeah. So you miss a lot. You're not there on the weekends when everybody else is home. It's like that challenge. There are quite a few fields where you would experience that, but in the restaurant business, it's really pronounced.
Yeah.
And then just the business. The politics of the business, the difficulties of operating restaurants. And you had actually asked me about the challenges of running a business, of running a restaurant. Right. Labor is by far the most difficult thing. Finding qualified people who are dedicated, who are focused.
So you're very successful. I know that you don't like that word, but again, you have 4 thriving restaurants in the borough of Brooklyn. That is really a big success. So what do you think your strengths have been? What do you think have led you really to being so successful with these restaurants?
I would say dedication and focus. Those are the two I think factors in my life that keep me going even when the going gets tough.
And was there ever a time when you felt like you questioned it, or were you just
this morning?
Straight? This morning, you were, yeah.
Later
so you
on
came
tonight.
here instead, right? Which we're happy about. But were there any serious time where you said, "I'm not sure that I can do this," or was it for you a straight? Did you ever have times where it wasn't so successful? Did you open up a restaurant that didn't get, or were you kind of on the straight path?
We've been lucky. We're definitely blessed. Every one of our restaurants was profitable for the entire time that it was open. And I shouldn't say for the entire time that it was open. But a lot of restaurants, first year and a half, 2 years, you're building up to business. But I've closed successful restaurants that someone else might call successful because it didn't quite work within the confines of my life or my lifestyle or even my business model.
Which is interesting because then you really identified what your goals were, what you wanted both professionally as well as personally.
Right.
So it sounds like you were very conscious and aware of that and made decisions based on that.
Right.
Which is so important because you don't really hear a lot of people that do that. And I think that you're being aware of that could be a contributing factor to your success. You don't like the word?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would definitely say that. And I'm also lucky to have a partner. We met at Picheline in '97, and we lost touch for about 2 years, but we ended up working together at 3 different places and then opening all of our restaurants together. So I'm
So
50,
partnerships.
Right.
Partnerships.
Right. And a good one.
A good partner.
Right.
That's great. So there's a lot of people that know you out and some people that don't know you, but they'll get to know you because they'll visit your restaurants after this seeing you on this show. Is there anything that people would assume about you that's not true?
I wouldn't say any specific thing about me personally, but again, about the business.
Okay.
This is not the business in which to get rich.
Okay.
Even with 4 restaurants, it's just not how the business works.
So you can have a successful business, but it might not be financially as profitable as some other
people would
business,
think.
or
Right.
as people would think.
Absolutely.
So you could be, well, that goes right into the definition of how we define success, right? What is success? Is it making all the money, or is it doing what you love and having a product and also balancing that with enough money to survive?
Right. And I would say that, I define success as achieving what I set out to achieve.
Which is great.
And that's, it's really that simple. And I'll give you an example. In the restaurants, occasionally there'll be a customer who sends something back. I don't like this chicken, or, the meatloaf is overcooked. And I've always instructed my chefs, and chefs are very, serious about getting their thing just right. But I always instruct them that when that plate comes back, you look at the plate and see if it is what we intended. And if it is what we intended, all you can do is ask the customer if they'd like something else, or how to resolve the problem. It's not about who's right or who's wrong. It's about, did you achieve what you intended to do? And that's kind of...
That's a great question. Well, this has been so great. Thank you so much, Craig, for being on the show today. It's been a real pleasure to meet you, and it really sounds like you've been able to balance what you've wanted and became really successful while continuing to really make new goals for yourself. Yeah. And that's a really good lesson in terms of the balance, acknowledging the success, and then continuing to create new goals. So thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. And good luck.
I'll need it.
Yeah. As we just heard from our last guest, success is not always easy to self-acknowledge, yet it is so important. So today, please take a moment and acknowledge something that you can feel successful about. No matter the size, there's something that you can appreciate, even if it's just the effort that you're putting in to achieving your goals. And as Arthur Ashe said, success is a journey and not a destination. The doing is often more important than the outcome. On the next episode of Your Voice with Dr. Susan is my conversation with Joy Reid, the host of MSNBC's AM Joy. Hi, and welcome to Your Voice with Dr. Susan. On today's show, we're going to talk about something a little bit more serious that hopefully will help many of you that are watching today. I am so happy and honored to have on the show today Roni Jakubowitz. Roni, thank you and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And Roni is going to be talking to us about some of the challenges that he's faced with some mental health issues. Mm-hmm. So I really appreciate your bravery and your courage in terms of talking about this really important issue, because so many people really experience lots of different mental health issues themselves, as well as family members and friends. And so getting your perspective is really important for all of us to hear. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
The reason why I'm doing this is to spill my guts about what being bipolar is all about, what mental health is all about, what triggers it, and what medications I use to help with it.
Okay. So let's start with, when did you actually discover that you were struggling with an actual mental health issue?
I knew something was wrong when I was about 16 or 17. I was very hyperactive and I couldn't sit still, so I kept moving and moving and moving. And I turned to drugs to calm me down. And I didn't know that medicine was there because my parents were Polish Holocaust victims, so they didn't know anything. They didn't have any money, so they didn't know about psychologists, psychiatrists, and stuff.
And it was also the time, because we're going back now about 40 years. Yeah.
So, they didn't know what was going on. But I knew something was wrong because whatever I did to extremes. So if I did coke until my nose burnt. If I did pills, until I couldn't function anymore. In fact, I had 2 grand mal seizures from taking too many pills. So, yeah, so I did a lot of drugs for quite a few years. And
that was, you said, when you were about 16, you said,
16,
to
17,
20?
yeah. And there was a lot of chaos in my family. Nobody got along with each other, so there was always screaming and yelling in the house. So being in a dysfunctional family didn't help either, because when I was able to get out of the house and get a car at 17, I did everything to escape being home. And that led me to more drugs and more, because the chaoticness of living in that home made me want to do other things.
So you were really self-medicating at that time, and it sounds like it was a combination of the environment that you were in, as well as some internal stuff you learned later?
You know, and then whenever I had to face any kind of problem, you know, that I wasn't able to handle straight, I used to use drugs, and then I was able to do it as if it was nothing. So I found drugs a way to you know, get out there and do things that I normally wouldn't do, like dance on a disco floor, you know, things like that, or talk to a girl, or whatever the case might be.
So in some ways it was helpful. It helped, the drugs helped you?
Oh, yeah. I thought, you know, at that time that it was the perfect thing for me. I never saw
the problems.
What it was going to do to me in the long run. Which is forget everything that I did, had blackouts where I didn't remember the night before. God knows how I never got a DWI. I mean, it's just a matter of luck.
So then when did you discover that, how did you realize that there was something else going on, or that you were self-medicating, and what, because you're drug-free, I know, for many, many years, and you're sober. So what was the piece that led you to realize, wait a second, I can't really do this anymore, and I'm something else might be going on here?
Okay, it's an interesting story. I wound up getting married. You know, I knew my wife for that became my wife. I knew her for 2 weeks, and showing the anxiousness of what I do, you know, spontaneously. So we got engaged in 2 weeks. We got married within 6 months, and then we had 2 kids. As time kept going, I got into sales, and I was using drugs to speak more.
But you were fully functioning at this point.
Yeah,
so you're, you know, that's the interesting thing, is that here, the way you describe your use, you know, some people might be picturing someone who's really not functioning, but you were really functioning while you were using all those substances. You got married, you were working, you had children. Okay.
Yeah, I thought that was, you know,
life.
Just normal. You know, I didn't know any other way of calming myself down. I also wound up talking like 100 miles a minute and saying things impulsively that I shouldn't have said. You know, so I would just spurt out something that would get me into trouble, and I didn't realize until I was 40. When I was 40, I came home from work one day, and there was a note on the door that said, either you fix this or you leave. And that kind of...
And that was from your wife?
That was from my wife. And that kind of made me realize that I needed to do something, because I didn't want to lose my kids. Her, I didn't really care that much about. But the kids, you know, I couldn't handle that. So I wound up going to AA meetings and saw a therapist, and I was really nervous going into an AA meeting.
And was she supportive of the process?
Not really.
Oh, because it sounds like she was the impetus, though, to really flag and say, hey, you need to do something.
Right, and that's the funny part about it, is that you would think that she would be supportive.
So she wasn't?
And no, because people that are supportive in AA, usually the wives would go to Al-Anon, which is where they learn about the alcoholism and the drug addiction, but she didn't go to any of that. So the support I had, well, first of all, getting off the alcohol was really tough.
Did you go to any detox programs?
I wound up going to when I withdrew from alcohol, I did it on my own.
Wow.
Which was a big mistake, because they say you can die by detoxing on your own.
So you wouldn't recommend that to people who are watching?
No, not at all.
Even though it worked for you, really you would, you know, yes.
Yeah, you can have a heart attack or something
it's very
serious.
dangerous to not do it, to do it unsupervised.
Yes. So, you know, I wound up going to AA. I had the sweats for like 2 weeks. I couldn't sleep. And then eventually I did what they call 90-90, which is, you know, 90 days clean. And that gets you started, you know, in as far as the AA process is concerned. And I was able to stay clean for about 5 years.
Wow, that is
Yeah,
great. So
yeah.
from that moment, you stayed clean. And what kinds of other things were you doing then during that time
I was
what
working.
helped you?
I was working out.
Working out?
So I was doing that. I was watching my diet because I was always into the fitness world. So I did that. But it wasn't easy, and I would tell anybody who wants to do it, but it's a struggle. It's
Yeah.
not something that, you just do.
So you were, it's wonderful. So you were sober for 5 years.
Right.
And then at one point were you going for counseling? Did you go for marriage counseling or family counseling?
No.
Or you mentioned she wasn't going to.
Right. We tried
anything.
marriage counseling. We only did it one time.
Okay.
And-
And then at what point, though, did you discover that you had some mental health issues? Because as you stated
Okay.
earlier, you said that you were diagnosed with bipolar
Bipolar.
disorder.
Here's what
Yeah.
happened. When I
Okay.
turned 40, I wound up going to a psychiatrist because,
At that same time when you got the note from
right.
your wife?
Yeah, because we all knew something was wrong, and I was recommended to go to a psychologist, and he saw me.
I'm sorry, was that a psychologist? Or
Psychiatrist.
a psychiatrist. Okay.
And he saw me the first time, and the first time that he saw me, he said, "Ronnie, I know what your problem is." He says, "You're bipolar," and I said, "How could you know that?" In like 60, like 30 minutes or even less. He says, "Ronnie, you talk 1,000,000 miles a minute. 1 minute you say everything's okay, and then you're telling me that you have all these issues and problems." He said, "With no doubt, you're bipolar." So he decided to put me on different medications.
Now, were you sober at that time?
Yeah,
You
I
were.
was.
You had been. Because, just to let people know, he sounds really good that he was able to diagnose, but usually people don't diagnose that quickly, and especially if somebody's using, it's really important that we take somebody off of and that they're sober
Of
and not
course,
using drugs.
because when you get on the medications that the psychiatrist wanted to give me, if you drink or do drugs with those medications, think they call them SIRRs or whatever. These are like antidepressants, antipsychotics.
Right.
So when he first started putting me on a cycle of medication, they have to figure out what's going to work the best
Right,
for you.
yeah.
So in the beginning, when I started taking medication, and this is what a lot of young people deal with, is that there's a lot of side effects. When you're hyper, a lot of people like that manicness of rushing around, feeling like you're high, even though you're not on anything. Because even when you're not on drugs, when you're manic, you feel like you're high.
I think if I could, just for the viewing audience, to clarify actually what bipolar is, just kind of briefly, it's when you've actually had at least one manic episode where you were probably experiencing, as you describe, that mania, that manic, and then really one depressive episode. And so I'm sure that that's one of the things that they were looking for in diagnosing you, so that you expect. And what's interesting in terms of what you did and what so many people do is that when they treat the depression or treat the mania with drugs instead of seeking help. So it was really great that you eventually got to somebody who was able to correctly diagnose you. So continue with how did the medications then help you?
At first, it was the worst thing that I could imagine. What it does to you is, like, say you're manic high and you're running around and you have all this energy. All of a sudden, when they put you on a cycle, and when I say a cycle, it means more than one med. It's a group of
meds. Cocktail.
It's a
right?
cocktail.
It's a cocktail.
Yes,
yes,
exactly.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was, from being racing and being like this hypermaniac,
Yeah.
when I took the drugs, it felt like I was walking, but there was like a wall blocking me from going any further. That's how I felt. And it took a while.
What do you mean by that in terms of like, did it feel like you were working against something, almost
I
like
was working against
was
myself.
it like riding a bicycle with a flat
it's
tire?
It's like riding
almost,
a bicycle
with
and
a flat tire?
trying to ride that bike through a wall. You can't go forward and you can't go back.
So you felt kind of stuck.
I felt stuck in that spot. But with time, you know, they adjusted it and adjusted it and adjusted it.
It took a while to get the right combination.
Yeah, and they've
Okay.
changed it over the years many times, because after a while they're not as effective when you use them all the time. So then I changed to different cocktails that they gave me. And there are side effects. Now this is where it gets touchy with young people. There are physical, sexual, weight gain, and all kinds of other side effects to these medications. And they make you balanced. So if you used to like to go here, you're not going there anymore. Or, you know, but that's what they explained to me was that's normal. See, I didn't think it was normal. I thought I liked being over here. But they're saying being here, it balanced, is the way you need to be. You don't have lows and you don't have highs.
Well, how is that for you?
It was difficult at first, and people noticed that I wasn't that happy, jovial, you know, funny guy that I was before, that I was more subdued and sedated. And do I like it even like now? No, but you know, I've been told that this is the way it's supposed to be.
But for you, do you experience, I mean, what I'm hearing is that other people are telling you that you're supposed to be kind of more stable, but when you were manic, you were also taking other drugs. So do you feel, even though sometimes being manic produces productivity and it could feel good, do you, though, overall, given the consequences of that mania, do you feel like the medication is helping you, and do you feel better being stable?
Well,
overall?
I'll tell you the truth. That when taking the medication, I'm not going into those manic highs, and I don't need the drugs to bring me down. So if I wasn't diagnosed with bipolar and I wasn't taking the meds,
you would be back on
I
drugs.
would be back on drugs to calm me down, whether it be alcohol and whether it be pills or whatever. And again, as I told you, I was doing them to excess because it would take a lot to calm me down. Like, I never liked drugs like cocaine because they make you even more hyper. So you don't want to take a hyper person or a manic high and make it higher. So, you know, I did get addicted to it, but I never really liked it. And I got off of it very young. But the medication, do I like being on it? Do I feel better being on it? I mean, is it great for me, you know, the way I feel? No, sometimes when my friends make a comment that, you know, when my friends make a comment like, you're not who you used to be. But, you know, I've adjusted, and now they're used to me the way I am. I mean, would they like to see me in that crazy...
So they would like to see you in that crazy, because you were the life of the party.
Yeah, exactly.
And more fun. But how did you feel? And were they knowing about the drugs and the alcohol and what it was doing to you when you weren't at the party?
I know. Well, you know, they really started to realize that I was getting excessive and that I needed to do something to stop what I was doing, or I'd probably be dead by now.
Well, I think you're raising an interesting issue, because sometimes for some people, especially if people are in a manic phase, it's a lot of fun for them and for others, but they're not really seeing what the person is going through when they are away from the party, when they go home, and the struggles that one experiences within themselves. And that's kind of, I think, what I'm hearing from you.
That is.
That your friends really liked you almost better to be the life of the party.
And
but,
I thought
but
I
you were
liked
suffering.
myself. And
you thought you liked yourself.
I thought I liked myself better that way, because when your friends tell you the next day, Ronnie, do you know what you did yesterday? And I wouldn't remember because I was so drugged up. I had a blank. And I'd say, no. I said, did I say anything stupid? And 9 out of 10 times I did. I said something very insulting. Or, you know, I would just spit out things or physically do something that was stupid.
And how did you feel about that?
I thought I was the life of the party, you know, so really I wasn't the life. I thought the party revolved around me. If it was somebody's wedding, it wasn't their wedding, it was my wedding. And I was going to show everybody that I can dance all night and drink all night and have a great time. But in actuality, you know, I was, you know, they always say, Ronnie, you reached a point where you were really funny, but then you crossed the line. And that's what a lot of younger kids do, is they cross the line and then they get themselves in trouble, and then they do DWIs. And that DWIs are no joke. I go to a group, And
Just in case people, for the audience, if they don't know what is EWI is, it's driving while intoxicated.
right.
Yeah.
And these people, what they go through with one DWI, they take their car away. I mean, it's not like years ago where you can almost get away with a DWI. Now the laws are so strict that if they catch you even buzzed, like that commercial, buzz driving,
Yeah.
you're finished. You are literally finished. So
So what enabled you to continue to stay on, because it sounds like, the medications, going through all those different cocktails to find, can be very stressful. And how did you stay the course in terms of staying sober, and what supports did you have? And you said your wife didn't go with you to counseling,
no,
but was she supportive of you, or you still?
Not really.
Now
No,
is she
no.
supportive of you?
We didn't have a good relationship. No matter what I did, nothing was ever good enough for her.
And how about now? Is she supportive of you now, or
we're divorced.
you're divorced?
Yeah, we're
Okay.
divorced. So I have nothing to do with her. I want nothing to do with her. And I realized how, even though I was drinking and everything, I realized how much impact she had that made me want to drink even more.
So in terms of the destructive relationship
Right.
between
And then
you?
what happened was, when I stopped doing drugs and started taking medication and everything, I wanted to see what would happen. Was it me creating this entire toxic environment? But what I found was, after a year of being straight, it wasn't me. I still felt the same, way about her, that I disliked her and stuff. So then I asked for a divorce. But then I decided, for the kids' sake, I would stay. And then at that point, I stayed, and then she wanted the divorce because she said I was getting out of hand. So yeah, and she wound up, what really hurt was she wound up getting cancer. Breast cancer, and I was there for every one of her treatments.
And at this point, you were sober.
Yeah, and she was
Yeah.
telling me how much she loved me and everything. And once she got home, all of a sudden she wanted a divorce. So I felt betrayed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you and she and the kids really went through a lot of different.
Oh yeah,
things
they went
between
through a
you.
lot of they
Yeah.
went through a lot of my manic highs and my manic lows, and screaming and yelling. I mean, I don't attribute everything as my fault, but I definitely take responsibility for a lot of it.
So you went through so much in terms of the manic episodes, the drug use, the difficult divorce. What's kept you on? Because you've continued to be sober, and
Right.
what resources do you use? Or
I go to group therapy once a week,
and is that with a therapist, the group therapy?
Yes, that's with a licensed therapist. And then I go for individual therapy, which is one-on-one, at least once a week. And it was twice a week, but they reduced it to once a week.
And are you also going to any 12-step programs
No, I'm
as
not
well?
doing any.
Did you find them helpful?
Yeah, when I turned 40 and it really got bad, and I wound up having to go to AA to get off of drinking, I felt it was, helpful. But then when I had my second round, after the 5 years, I kind of got a little, fed up with it, like it was starting to bore me. You would hear the same stories in the groups.
So for you, it didn't work. I know for a lot of people, it does work in the beginning, but then after a while, you really figured out what was working for you.
Right, and plus I was getting therapy. I was getting the individual therapy, and and it's nice. And anybody who's like doesn't want to go to a therapist or whatever, no, these days there's nothing like it. You get to talk about your problems. You get to go over everything. They give you advice. It's really helpful.
So you found that really helpful.
Oh,
in
yeah.
terms of, that's wonderful.
And group therapy is good also because you hear other people's stories and they relate to the things that you've been through, So when they talk about their drug addictions and why they have it and their mental health issues, and you express yourself in that group, you feel comfortable. Whereas outside people don't really know. If you tell somebody you're bipolar, they look at you funny.
Well, and also I think today the use in the media the word bipolar is used very incorrectly. People just throw it around because of people might be in a bad mood or good mood, and it's just in popular culture right now, and I hear it all the time being really used incorrectly. But in your case, you were really diagnosed with bipolar because you had at least one of the depressive episodes and one of the manic episodes, and have really, it sounds like, received a lot of good treatment for it.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned, if I can just go back earlier, that there was a lot of side effects to the medication. One of the side effects you mentioned was weight gain. But I see, in your shape, you're in good shape and
Right.
physical. And so could you talk a little bit about how, I know that there was a time when you were not at this weight, where the medication did affect you, and what you went through in terms of getting your weight back on a comfortable place for you?
It's an interesting question. What happened was I was getting really disgusted that I was putting on weight. I got up to 275. And I kept saying to the doctor, the psychiatrist, like, can we get me off of the medications that make you heavy? And she said, it's not the medications that are making you heavy. They increase your appetite. So I went out and said, I'm going to beat this. And I went on the Atkins diet. And what the Atkins diet does, because you're taking in so much protein, it reduces the sugars in your system that make you crave food. And I was craving food much less. And I started to notice I was losing dramatically. So anybody who says you can't lose weight on these medications, it's not true.
And you did it also with medical supervision. I mean, you spoke to the doctor in terms of what you were doing. You get monitored.
Yes, I was getting monitored.
Because that's very important, that we don't want anybody to do anything drastic in terms of reducing their weight, especially if they're on medications, is to really do it in consultation with medical professionals.
Yeah, but I found the Atkins diet to work for me.
And how about working out? And I know that you were, you stopped working out?
Since my divorce, that made me so crazy, it was a 5-year divorce. And
when you say it was a 5-year divorce, you mean that was a 5-year struggle, legal struggle?
Yeah, it was a 5-year process of running back and forth to court and everything. And I just, lost I was so screwed up with the divorce and the craziness of the divorce, the court hearings, the this, the that, the money arguments, that I just lost my zest for working out. And as a kid, I worked out 365 days a year.
Wow.
And I really loved it. But lately, I like my quiet. I like my peace time. I don't love to be around a million people.
Well, it's interesting. So do you walk?
I do when the weather's good.
And how much do you walk a lot?
Like 2 miles, 3 miles.
Okay, so you're doing something.
Yeah.
Because usually for people who are struggling, actually for all of us, exercise can also help with some of the more minor symptoms that one can experience.
Yeah. It does something to your endomorphins or whatever you call those things, But yeah, walking is good for me.
Good. So although you don't train the way you used to, you are getting some exercise.
Something, but more so in the summer, in the warmer months than in the winter. In the winter, I got lazy and fell in love with my lounge chair. So I watch a lot of TV, and then I read a lot. I go to the library and read. So I like to keep busy doing something and get out of the house, because also being bipolar, there's times where you don't want to go out of the house.
So if you were, I'm just curious and give you the opportunity for our listeners, if somebody is out there struggling with thinking that maybe they themselves or somebody that they know has possibly either a mental health issue or bipolar specifically, what would you recommend to them?
I would recommend that parents should be able to see signs of this disease or whatever you call it, because if caught young, I don't know where I would have been. Maybe I would have done more with my life. Maybe I would have not gotten drunk as much and wasted days and years of my life doing that.
Wow.
So I feel that I probably had a mental health issue when I was young that was never addressed.
Yeah.
So I would tell parents to be aware.
It sounds like you would recommend for people to really take advantage of what we know in the information, and for parents, if you see that your child is having any kind of issues, to really go and explore possible treatment for them.
Right.
And also, what about friends and family,
And
too?
I was going to make another point.
Okay. And
what happens with parents also is sometimes they don't want to admit that their kid has a problem, and they're killing them.
Yeah, that's a good
killing
point.
them.
That's a really good point. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time today.
Okay.
Perhaps you can come back another day to talk more about this, because there's so many issues that you've raised, and it's wonderful that you were able to really overcome years and years of drug use and of undiagnosed mental health issues. So congratulations on the work. It's been great. Thank you, Roni.
Thank you.
Thank you. As we just heard from our last guest, there are so many resources out there. So please, if you or someone you know is struggling with a substance abuse issue, with a mental health issue, with a relationship issue, with any type of personal or relationship struggle, please get help. There's lots of different resources out there. You can start in New York by calling 311. You can also ask someone that you know for a referral. Ask your doctor's office. You can also call or contact the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, the National Association of Social Workers. There are also spiritual and religious-based counselors, as well as marriage and family therapy, and 12-step programs for a variety of different issues. The important thing is to start and reach out and get help. Thank you for watching Your Voice with Dr. Susan. If you'd like to be on the show or have any questions, please contact us at yourvoice@drsusan.nyc. Thank you. So what keeps you going?
I love my job. I get to make people laugh for a living, and I get paid for it. I mean, I can't think of anything better than that.
Right now, it's a very difficult time for many people in this political atmosphere on both sides of the table. No matter who you like or where you're feeling about where our country is right now, it's tough. And so, I'm always thinking that this is a really good time for comedy, that we really need that comic relief. Are you finding that?
That's what people are telling me. I'm not really sure. I think attendance might be up a little bit, but it's hard to tell. It's kind of interesting, though. I did a show right after the election at a theater in Delaware, and the director, one of the comics, basically went off on Trump and ranted about Trump. He was definitely anti-Trump. And the director of the theater said to me, hey, next time you come back here, don't do any political comedy, because I got emails telling me that you shouldn't, the Trump people were upset.
Right.
And so the next time I did a show there, I said to my colleagues, hey, we got to avoid political comedy.
Unless, of course, you insult everyone.
Well,
Right, which
either
some-
way,
which some comics
you
do,
can insult
right.
everybody, but people are still going to be offended at the part that they didn't like. But what happened was we went back there a couple of months later, and we did Q&A after the show, which is something that we like to do, is talk to the audience after the show. And the first question we got was, why didn't you do any political jokes?
Well, for young people, I think it is imperative that they just be motivated and believe in what they want and just stay positive. Because if you don't stay positive and you don't have that mindset to become, then it's going to be rough. And I also want parents to know that, like, really, like, if your kid wants something to do, like, even if you want to box, they want to play soccer, whatever they want to do, just inspire them. Like, just keep, like, let them be who they want to be.
What a beautiful message. That's great.
Thank
And so
you.
what's kept you motivated? Like, because there's, given what you went through,
Yeah.
there's plenty of people who really don't stay on the right track. But not only did you stay on the right track, but you were very brave about it. But what keeps you going on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, to just keep going?
I think it's just knowing that I can be somebody to help somebody. As long as I can help somebody, then I have a purpose, and my purpose is to help people and to inspire people. That's my purpose.
When we would go out, like we went to Lorain, Ohio, and we talked to steel workers, and what they were telling us was, again, it was completely the opposite of what the data was telling us was happening in Ohio. And we definitely believed what we were hearing, but you couldn't really tell the extent to which what we were hearing people say. We also did, the same thing in Philadelphia, and we fielded these sort of multi-ethnic, almost focus groups of people, and all the doubt that you were hearing about the outcome we all thought was going to happen, it really didn't match the numbers. And so I think a lot of us thought it was interesting. It was sort of anthropologically interesting, but it wasn't determinative. Turns out it was determinative.
Very interesting. It reminds me of qualitative versus quantitative research. And sometimes when people were just doing too much quantitative, it didn't really get to what was actually happening. And you need that qualitative in order to hear what the issues. And that's what it sounds like that you were experiencing. You're having an impact, your show, and you personally have an impact in terms of the media and really covering things. And as you said earlier, in terms of looking at what people are actually saying, not just the data. If you could send a message to the media, what would that be? What would you want to see more of happening in the media?
I think the media has to, it sounds odd because media people are fairly cynical, but I think media people need to be more skeptical. There are certain tics that the media has that they don't seem to be able to help. There's this quest for normalcy. The media is like a sort of compass that's forcing itself north all the time. And media people want to find some way to make everything normal, to make every situation normal. But the example that I would give them is that, 10 years ago, Turkey was a normal democratic country. It was a country that got let into NATO because it was a normal democratic country. It's now an autocracy, a completely authoritarian state that jails journalists, that doesn't allow dissent, and that had an attempted coup. That can happen extremely quickly. My husband and I recently visited Cuba, a country that also used to be a totally democratic, open, free society that is not. And democracy is so tenuous, and Americans, I don't think, understand how tenuous it is.